Good afternoon. Thank you, everybody, for coming to our 4 o'clock session today in our compliance track, innovating in the midst of changing regulations. Really appreciate you being here with us. I love that video as a tee-up, really because the thrust of it speaks to the imperative that it is for Microsoft to be trustworthy. If we are not trustworthy, in turn, people, organizations will not use our products. And that is a great setup for today's session, because in a world where it is an imperative to be trustworthy, I can't think of a theater that is more important than what we're talking about today, namely compliance with regulations. And so, in turn, the thrust of our session today is really going to be about Microsoft's approach to compliance with regulations, compliance with the myriad patchwork of complex, dynamic, worldwide regulations. And we're going to take a bit of a team sport approach to our presentation today, which is appropriate because in many ways we take a team sport approach to compliance at Microsoft generally. And so before I introduce my colleagues for the session today, I want to give you a preview of what I hope you'll take from the session today. Thematically, there are 3 things that I hope you'll get out of this. The first is that Microsoft understands regulations. We live and breathe regulations. We've been doing it for a long time. We monitor them. We know how they're enacted. We know why they're enacted, and we love the work associated with it. The second is that when it comes to our own offerings, we take compliance seriously and conform to the highest standards of compliance. We invest massively in compliance. We take organized, structured approaches to compliance. And we'll talk a little bit about the team sport proposition that I alluded to earlier as it relates to our approach. And the third thing is that we love to take our own IQ and our own learnings as it relates to compliance and offer that and package it up in ways for the benefit of our customers. It's not only something that we think is the right thing to do, it's highly existential for us. It connects directly to our mission. It connects directly to our approach to trying to empower every organization on the planet to achieve more. And so the agenda that will proceed along for the next 70-ish minutes or so will largely align with those 3 themes. I'm going to kick off and talk a little bit about our approach to understanding regulations. Kim Howell from our privacy office is going to follow me, and she's going to walk you through Microsoft's journey to GDPR compliance, taking a bit of an internal look. And then Kareem Batish from our engineering team is going to follow Kim and talk a little bit about how Microsoft used its considerable learnings in the realm of GDPR compliance and brought those to the benefit of our customers. And then we'll end the segment with a special guest, Kalinda Reyna from LinkedIn, and we'll talk to Kalinda about LinkedIn's own experience and get Kalinda's reflections and learnings as it relates to LinkedIn's compliance journey for GDPR. Now that I've introduced my colleagues, I'll just take a second to introduce myself. My name is Matt Penarzik. I am an attorney in the SELA group, and I lead a team that supports Chris Caposella's marketing and consumer sales organization. In that role, my team and I focus quite a bit on counseling with respect to compliance as it relates to regulations. And man, there's a lot of regulations out there. Like, we're not complaining, it keeps us busy, but holy cow, there is a lot to comply with across the world, and it keeps us up. Taking a step back, though, I wonder, have you ever pondered, why do we even have all of these regulations around the world? Like, why can't the world just agree to have some discrete number of regulations apply to technology, and then we could all kind of get on with our lives in a simple, more predictable way? And what's interesting as you think about that question is, it really, I believe, when you answer it, gets to the heart of the very symbiotic relationship between technology and regulation. Technology itself is a cause, I believe, for why we have so much regulation. More specifically, I would argue that innovation itself is a cause for why we have so much regulation. There is a clear symbiotic relationship between innovation and regulation. And I would assert that if you look back on the annals of history, if you look at some of the biggest paradigm shifts that society has ever had to contend with, this becomes clear. Take the first industrial revolution, where society just figured out how to mechanize, where society figured out how to take coal, power steam engines. What happened? Well, society now had to contend with all sorts of environmental issues that were unforeseen. And that caused society to have to think about a new genre, a new set, a new framework of regulation that had never before really been something that it had to contend with. Second industrial revolution, same thing, assembly lines. Think Henry Ford. What happened there? Well, you had lots of workers starting to assemble, starting to get organized, starting to contribute to the proposition. It caused us as a society to have to think about those workers and their protection. What was born? New labor law frameworks. And now think about the third industrial revolution, the era of the PC, of the internet, personal information now being communicated all over the place via new modes. Society, again, had to start to grapple with how do we feel about this? How do we feel about personal information being communicated in ways where it is being collected and used and disseminated? What does that mean as a society? And you can see the pattern here. Innovation creates the need or the perceived need for regulation. Regulation is initiated to prescribe or to put constraints on the use or deployment of that innovation. And then one rinses and repeats, because innovation doesn't stop. Innovation will continue amidst the very regulation that was put in the first place. And now many people would argue that we are in the throes, in the midst of the fourth industrial revolution, right? Where technology is embedded or ingrained in absolutely everything that we do. Where technology is a core part of all of our experiences. And so the focus that we've already started to put on personal information and its use, collection, and sharing is even more important now than it ever has been. And so privacy law has become something that is on everybody's mind. And that's not just because of the GDPR, which was promulgated some 6 months ago, but really because we're seeing new technological contexts almost every week. But if you think about privacy as a personal value or as a legal value, it isn't actually new. As far as I can discern, you can go all the way back to Roman law. And even within Roman law, you can find aspects of privacy law, which is a little bit, I suppose, odd, given if you think of, certain Roman behaviors at that time that were, let's just say, not so private. But it is not a new concept. It is not a new concept in the annals of time. And that's true also from the US perspective. What we have seen over time is that as new innovation has been introduced in the US societies have become concerned about privacy. When the telegraph was introduced, there were concerns about intercepts. When telephones were introduced, there were concerns about wiretaps. and the most profound introduction of technology as it relates to US privacy law is? Any guesses? The internet. It's a good one. The camera, of all things. The camera. In the 1850s, 1860s, cameras used to be these big hunking objects, right? Where if you wanted your picture taken, you had to go to where the camera was and get your portrait. So you were really inviting yourself to think about how your picture was going to be taken. There wasn't a lot of privacy that was likely going to concern you about that transaction. But what ended up happening is that cameras started to get much smaller and much more portable. And they became available to journalists. And journalists started to take pictures of people. And those pictures of people started to get published in papers. And society started to ask, are we okay with that? Are we okay with people having their picture taken without permission, without consent, and having these pictures published in papers? How do we feel about that? And what we discovered was there was no law that actually constrained that. And so people, including Harvard, started to write about this and advocate that there should be a law, that there should be some constraint on the intersection between cameras and newspapers. And so over time, what you started to see is that new laws started to emerge. And so while privacy is not a new concept in most societies, it is a concept that is constantly having to be addressed in new technological concepts, new technological contexts. And so while 100 years ago we were looking at privacy at the intersection of newspapers and cameras, that is not what we're looking at today, and that is not what we're looking at tomorrow. This is what we are constantly monitoring. This is what we are constantly anticipating. And this is what we are constantly looking to get out in front of. What are the technological contexts? Where is privacy law going to need to be stress tested next? That is very fun work, I assert. And it's also, in addition to understanding technological contexts, critical to understand cultural reasons as to why regulations are as they are. The ways in which societies experience for the need for new regulations is going to naturally be different depending on their various contexts and circumstances. And so it's for this reason, and the more somber underpinnings perhaps as it relates to the experience of the EU people, that you have the GDPR, the newest privacy regulation in the world, really creating the vanguard in terms of where privacy law is at, really creating the most comprehensive law that the world now needs to contend with. And it's a regulation that we at Microsoft have invested massively in. We put 1,600 engineers working in conjunction with attorneys, with privacy professionals like Kim Howell, really coming together as a team sport, bringing the best IQ of the legal profession, the best IQ of the privacy profession, the best IQ of our engineers, and coming up with a plan and an approach. And it's something that we've been doing now for about 20 years, dating back to the time where we actually had our first chief privacy officer some 20 or 21 years ago. So while our approach is no doubt not perfect, it is something that we have practiced over the years, and hopefully we're getting to the point where we're very, very good at it. And it's a regulation that we at Microsoft support wholeheartedly. At Microsoft, we do believe, as Satya alluded to, that privacy is a fundamental human right. So when the promulgation of the GDPR took effect on May 25th, Microsoft announced that rights would be afforded to all individuals worldwide as it relates to data subject rights, not just the EU nationals. So we went above and beyond what the law actually required because we thought it was the right thing to do. Because at a very existential level, this isn't just about Microsoft. We know, as we mentioned earlier, that if our products and offerings are not trusted, they won't be used by our customers. And we know that GDPR gave us the opportunity to achieve our mission to help our customers and our organizations achieve more. I think you get the idea with the mission statement. Empower every person and organization on the planet to achieve more. And the way that we chose to do this was by taking a lot of the IQ and learnings from our own compliance efforts. We learned a lot about assessing and managing risk. We learned a lot about identifying and protecting data. And so we took those learnings and created a set of investments that we then packaged up and provided to our customers. I've listed 3 here. Kareem is going to get into these in more detail. But fundamentally, this is about looking at the features and capabilities of Microsoft 365 and enabling our customers to use those to discover their data, to classify their data, and to govern their data. It's about looking at new innovations we've got called Compliance Manager that enable our customers to continuously understand where they're at in their compliance journey. I mean, the first order of business for any organization as it relates to compliance should be to understand exposure and risk. This is a tool that helps our customers do that. And we've introduced a new service trust portal now where customers can access audit reports and customers can access guides that will enable them to understand how our offerings can be used for purposes of their own compliance. But that's not going to be enough, and we're not going to stop there. We can't. Because while the GDPR is the latest and most comprehensive and rigorous privacy law that the world has ever seen, it isn't the first, and by no means is it going to be the last. We know that we've got privacy laws being considered as we speak in India, in Brazil, in other parts of the world. We know that a very comprehensive state law in California has just been promulgated, effective as of 2020, and will create a new watermark in the United States. We know that other states and other countries are going to follow. So the world isn't going to stand still. We know that, and we know that we can't either. Because at the end of the day, this all does come back to trust for us. As Satya said, we know our customers aren't going to use our products if they don't trust it. And so that's why we provide 4 strong commitments to our customers regarding the Microsoft Cloud. In addition to our approach as it relates to privacy, we know our customers need to trust our approach as it relates to security. We know that our customers need to know and trust our approach as it relates to compliance standards. And we know that our customers need to understand that we are speaking to them transparently and letting them know everything that they need to know about their data. And so that's why we have litigated against our own government 4 times. We don't enjoy litigating for the sake of litigating, but when we have to do that to stand up for a customer interest, we have done that. And that's why when you look at our compliance standards, we believe that we have the best certifications in the industry. And in some ways, this takes us full circle. The world is going to keep moving forward. Innovation is not going to stop. Microsoft is going to play a key part of that. We know regulations are going to continue to be promulgated, and we will be there to influence those regulations. We will be there to comply with those regulations, and we will be there to help our customers comply with those regulations as well. So at Microsoft, we know that we are on a continuing journey as it relates to compliance with regulation. And that's okay. Bring it on. In the interest of furthering the team sport analogy or metaphor here, I would like to welcome a very key player on our team, Kim Howell, to the stage, and she will talk about Microsoft's internal journey.
All right, so we're going to talk about what it took to get Microsoft GDPR compliant. And you can imagine this was quite a heavy and extensive workload for everybody. And it was, for me, it was about a 2-year journey that we were on. And it started this way. Brad Smith, our chief legal officer, went to Chris Capicella, who manages the marketing consumer business organization, said, hey, there's this thing called GDPR. So Chris says, hey, Kim, there's this thing called GDPR. And luckily, Chris had somebody in place already when that happened, so he wasn't starting from scratch. So from that moment on, we spent a lot of time with our lawyers. And I'm not a lawyer myself. I am what we call a privacy program owner. So I have a team of privacy managers who work in the marketing and consumer business to make sure that all of our marketing campaigns, events such as these, are actually privacy compliant. So we spent a lot of time understanding what those requirements were. And that was a fairly daunting exercise. But then when we figured it out and we came to kind of a resolution about this is how we're going to interpret what these requirements are, then it really moved from being kind of a privacy issue to being a change management issue. So I had to look at the privacy program that I had in my organization and say, because of GDPR, what needs to change? So when we did that, and conducted that gap analysis, there were 3 areas of change that I identified. The first one was around policies. So the actual privacy requirements that GDPR mandated. So GDPR has rules now that are different about how, one, what is personal data and what can you do with it. So we needed to understand those changes and update our policies. We needed to actually change the privacy program structure itself. So above and beyond telling companies how they can use personal data, GDPR mandated certain things around having data protection officers in place. And then we also had to change our internal data handling practices. So I'm going to go into each of these a little bit to tell you how we tried to fill those gaps. So first of all, looking at the use of personal data. We have a set of Microsoft privacy policies and standards. There's a lot of, how many of you are in compliance roles? You're lucky, okay. But if you are, you know how many documents there are, right? So there's a repository of information. And so at Microsoft, we have 170 privacy managers such as myself. That's on top of all of the engineers and the lawyers that are working on privacy. We need to make sure that those 170 privacy professionals who are the front lines in doing the privacy reviews are giving consistent advice across the board. And in order to do that, we have to have a source of truth for them. So we had to go through all the existing policy documents and make sure that they were up to date and that any changes required because of GDPR were in those documents. We had to update all of the training collateral that we have. We have internal websites for our internal clients. We have on-demand training. We have in-person training. All that had to be changed. So, but the surprising thing might be that this was the easiest part of getting ready for GDPR. And the reason for that was we had a great base to work from. We didn't really change many of our actual privacy rules. So when now one of my privacy managers goes into a privacy review with one of our marketers and they go through the details of a campaign and how they're handling data, the advice that they give today is not much different from the advice that they gave before. I think that probably is surprising to a lot of people. So what was a little more difficult was the next part of this, the program architecture. So part of GDPR was to drive more accountability for privacy. And so there was better definitions about what is personal data, definitions about who's a controller versus a processor and what those obligations are, the fact that when you hire a supplier to manage personal data, you don't get off the hook, you still have to be accountable for it. So there are a lot of things that were mandated in GDPR to drive accountability. Those were the more difficult things to actually put into place. So there's now a requirement to have data protection impact assessments. So these are like regulator-ready documents about how we process personal data. So why we might have done privacy reviews before, we'd give our advice, we might have it documented in an email or in some more formal system, but it wasn't at a point where we could hand it over to a regulator if they asked. So now we had to look to see what are the things that require a data protection impact assessment. And we had to, what format do those go into? What repository do we put them in to make sure that they're ready? How often do we update them? But that also had a trickle-down effect, because I think at the company, we probably ended up with about 120 DPIAs, that's a guess. But beneath those are the individual privacy reviews that kind of ladder up to those higher level impact assessments. And now there was a requirement, and this is our interpretation, and what Microsoft decided to do, that every single processing of personal data has to be reviewed at least annually and has to be documented. So we had to implement a whole new process for archiving that information, tracking it, and being able to, again, pull up the details that can help when a DPIA is requested. We also had to update our procurement process to make sure when we hired suppliers that they had to sign a new data protection regulation. So there was a form that anybody, if a supplier wanted to be able to be hired by Microsoft to process personal data, they had to agree to a new set of requirements. And they had to prove that they were going to live up to their obligations. And then this was actually one of the things that freaked me out the most, was at one point in time we were saying any purchase order for somebody with a company that was going to process personal data, before they could open that purchase order, they had to do a privacy review. Do you know how many purchase orders are opened at Microsoft every year? I was like totally freaked out. Luckily, again, this was an ongoing process, had a negotiations like, can we really narrow this down to what are the high-risk things? What can we review in advance and say, hey, if you're using this supplier for this particular type of processing, it's okay. But if you're using them for something different, come to us in advance and let us know. So we created triggers. So we made sure that process was scalable and didn't put marketing on I really was worried about the capability of keeping up with this and being the person in between all the marketers and them wanting to get work done. So, but this was actually a part of GDPR as a privacy professional for 17 years that I actually this forced the company to re-look at everything, and it gave energy behind what we were trying to do. And so we were able to go to the next level of maturity. And I think that's really what it did for companies, even like Microsoft, who had privacy programs. The maturity level just had to go that much higher. So, but the hardest part, Grim's going to talk a little bit about how the company learned from our pain, was data subject rights. So GDPR gives data subjects the rights, lots of rights around their data. They can access it. So what data do you have about me? Delete my data. Export my data. So how do you make sure you actually, when somebody makes that request, that you really live up to that obligation? And that was really challenging. So again, we knew our larger data sets and where they were, but there's a long tail, very small data sets. And so we had to do a very comprehensive data inventory to make sure we knew where everything was. But that wasn't enough, because we wanted to give customers granular choices. So we didn't want to just say, delete all my data. We wanted to say, hey, I'm really only interested in my Bing search queries. Can you delete that? So we needed to identify the data, and then we needed to tag what type of data it was, so that when a request came through and somebody said, I want to delete my product usage information, we could delete just that piece of it, right? So we have to inventory, we have to tag, and then you have to have a system where somebody makes a request. They go to our website, they make a request. That request signals get sent out to all of the systems that have that data, and they do whatever it is, whether it's delete or access, or export the data for the customer. So you have to make sure all the data is tagged correctly. There's new data sets popping up every day. So again, this was a maturing thing for the company, and it made us think twice about why do we have so many different data sets out there, and do we really need all of that? And people really finally understanding the costs and the risks associated with having so much data in different places. So again, this was a welcome change for me, because now I have much more of a handle on where the data is, so I can provide better guidance to my clients. And we can also kind of start to rein in, why do we need so many data sets? Why do we need to use so many suppliers? And really kind of start reducing the risk surface area that we've had. So in closing, I just want to say that, never fail to take advantage of a good crisis. And to me, GDPR was one of the best crises of my career. As a privacy program owner, GDPR for me was honestly a win. It was good for customers. It was good for the maturing of our privacy program. But the reason that we succeeded was because we already had a program in place. And so this was incremental changes. And like Matt said, things evolved. There's going to be another GDPR. The thing I'm really worried about is the new regulations in the EU, and they're not done yet. So this is a constant change management exercise. And I would suggest to everybody, build a foundation that you can look to see what the changes are, and you can change quickly. Don't wipe and replace. Just build something that you can build upon. And learn from what we learned. So, Kareem?
Great. Thanks, Kim. Hi, my name is Kareem Batish. I'm a director in the Microsoft 365 core engineering team. That means I work on, or in the bowels of what is Microsoft 365 or the Office 365 services on things like storage, availability. I've been leading the teams that do search, the monitoring whether the service is up and running or not. And of course, on better securing our services and in the engineering work that goes into these compliance programs. So a lot like Kim, a couple of years ago, our boss has asked me to lead the compliance work to meet GDPR. And if this were a movie or a comic book, this is the part where the superhero gets a tingling sense that lets them know that danger is near. I didn't get that. I know we've done all these compliance programs, so I thought, just one more law, one more regulation, it's a piece of cake. We've been through this already, and that was a mistake. Going into GDPR, it was pretty clear, and you know this from your own organizations, data is growing at an exponential rate. The place and the wrinkle that GDPR added that was a big one, for Microsoft anyways, and particularly for engineering, was around telemetry. And telemetry is the data that we store that lets us know that our services are working correctly, that users are getting the experience we designed for them. And in that telemetry, we, of course, protect user data, but the GDPR gives users rights over that data, much like it does all the other data that customers put into our cloud. And telemetry data is growing at a much faster rate, or had been growing at a much faster rate than at the rest of, compared to all the other services. And that was the oh crap moment for me as an engineer. We actually had to go and build a whole bunch of new stuff that we had never imagined having to do before as part of adhering to this law over a couple of years. So I think Matt gave the number of 1,600. I count it closer to 2,000 if I count all of our partners in legal services and privacy, people working 2 years straight on this program. It became the majority of what many of us did. Now, the interesting part of all of this stuff is while we went and thought about how we retrofit new processes, new code, new ways of running things on top of all of that data and services we have, Microsoft, of course, didn't hold still. We brought 50 new services to market in just the last year, not to mention the last 2. And of the services and products that we had in market, those added hundreds of features that affect and influence and store user data. And of course, every service we build adds a set of telemetry to make sure that it's up and running properly and doing the thing we expect it to do. So all of our apps had to essentially fit into this program. So just like Kim mentioned, we use GDPR as a wedge to say, hey, this can't keep going on. We're either collecting far too much data, or when we do collect data, we need a really good reason to store this stuff and have common processes that we harmonize across the set of them, so that when a customer comes and asks us for something, or an individual makes a data subject request, they're not asking the Word team and the Exchange team and the Excel team each 3 different times for the same thing. they can come to Microsoft as a cloud provider just once and do that work. And like a lot of our products that are built from trust as a start, we looked at compliance and compliance with GDPR as an opportunity to share the experience, those hundreds of thousands of hours we spent with our engineering, legal, and privacy teams to make sure that you could and customers could benefit from the investments we made there. Now, if it were super easy, we would have front-loaded and done all the lifting when it came to doing compliance work. When we talk about compliance at Microsoft, the way we're able to build our products, we can help quite a lot with meeting compliance requirements, not just GDPR, but other regulations. But some of those requirements are shared. Some of that risk does need to be managed between customers and cloud providers. And I think that's true of any cloud provider in any organization. As an example, if you're going to run software on-prem, a software provider might actually sell you that software and give you some tools that help you comply with regs. But ultimately, if you look at the controls in most regulations, an organization is going to be on the hook to meet those requirements for almost all of their on-premises software as they do the operation of them. As you move higher up the stack, up to the cloud, the software as a service components can actually offload a whole bunch of responsibility to the cloud provider. So this comes in the package that you pay for when you buy something like Office 365 services or Microsoft 365. For example, the physical security of the servers and data centers, clearly that's something that we take care of. And that goes all the way up to identity and access management, where we start sharing some responsibilities. And then when you think of data classification, ultimately it's an organization's choice what they choose to put in the cloud. And so that responsibility is mostly borne by the customer. It's a place where we try to help and provide tools to do so. Does anybody here work in federal government IT or have worked in federal government IT? Nobody? All right. Well, if you have or do, there's a regulation called NIST 800-53. It's a set of about 1,000 controls. They're like rules that you need to follow to manage and control your data, your services that you run in the cloud. And it's actually a pretty good and pretty comprehensive set of rules. And Office 365 and Dynamics 365 and Azure comply with this set of rules. But if you look at it, when you think of what an organizational responsibility is, there's this set of 975 controls. A little more than 3/4 of them are managed by Microsoft. We take care of you meeting this regulation for your organization if you use Microsoft 365 services. And a little less than a quarter requires organizational work that Microsoft cannot do for you. To give you an example, access to production environment, Microsoft maintains 0 standing administrators to our services through a system we call Lockbox that allows us to protect the production environment. That's a key part of meeting the regulations around NIST 853. As an organization hosted in Microsoft Cloud, you clearly have to choose and screen the folks who are accessing the service and set up access controls so they don't abuse it. And you have audit logs that you can have for that. And then use features like AAD conditional access to control who and where the service is accessed and administered, as well as customer lockbox, so you can have a chain of authority of who approves elevation to access the service. A second class of controls would be around protecting data. Microsoft will use technologies like BitLocker to protect the data at rest, and then things like TLS to protect the data in transit and other layered security protocols. On the customer side, the customer would be responsible for doing things like requiring email encryption for sending mail outside or between an organization, for using tools like Azure IP to control access to documents and control their life cycle, and make sure that that data is protected. Last, a totally shared commitment might be around personnel control. So we have strict screening and background checking for employees. We also do training around security, and they're instructed and required to report any potential security breach. The exact same thing would have to be done for users or administrators that manage the Office 365 investments and manage organizational data on the customer side. So when we think about this set of shared responsibilities and we think of all these investments we make, of course what we want to do is make the investments that we've done for Microsoft available and accessible to customers. And that platform we break up in just three ways. The first is around assessing and understanding the risks that are proposed or that are present by storing data for your users, storing data to comply with regulations, managing services that comply with regulations. The second is once that assessment is done, to protect and govern the data and make sure that its life cycle is maintained. And the last is really dealing with and being efficient at dealing with any kind of requests or remediation to that data or to that information when you're handling those regulations. To better tee this up, I've got a video from one of our MVPs, Keith Tomey, to talk about how you can use Compliance Manager as a tool we built to help assess and manage risks.
I am Keith Twomey. I am a solution architect by trade, and I'm a Microsoft Most Valuable Professional. I want to introduce you to Compliance Manager, a cross-Microsoft Cloud Services solution designed to help you simplify your compliance journey with 3 key capabilities. There's ongoing risk assessment, giving you visibility into your compliance performance with a risk-based score reference. From a single dashboard, see your compliance stature across Microsoft Cloud Services, including Office 365, Azure, and Dynamics 365. You can create assessments for the regulation or standard that matters to your organization, GDPR, ISO, and more. It's a really powerful tool. This enterprise software is the first of its kind. You get actionable insights, including detailed information about what Microsoft does to secure your data and be compliant with regulatory requirements, and recommended actions to improve your data protection capabilities. Compliance Manager helps you to build the connection between technology solutions and regulatory requirements, so you can use the right tools to accelerate your compliance journey. So that just greases the wheels for a lot of efficiencies for me. Finally, there's simplified compliance. You can easily assign tasks and collaborate across teams. Track and record your compliance activities and upload your evidence, which helps you streamline your workflow and prep for auditing with detailed audit-ready reports. Compliance Manager helps you manage your compliance from just one place. I think Microsoft is both a technology company and a people company that focuses on solving real-world business process challenges that people face. Use it today at the Microsoft Service Trust Portal.
Great, thanks to Keith and the team that put that video together. If there's 2 things I'd like you to take away in addition to the Compliance Manager itself video that you just saw, it's that Compliance Manager is going to keep getting updated as regulations themselves evolve and get added. So what you're able to do is see how your organization stands and how Microsoft stands with respect to implementing the controls that are required by any particular regulation. So we do the hard work, teams like Kim's and Matt's do the hard work of translating the requirements that are in a regulation to actual implementation or functional requirements for how you use or operate a service. And our team translates that into a set of templates and instructions in Compliance Manager on how you can and should do things to meet and better meet those regulations. So that's pretty important that it stays up to date and you keep accruing that. The other interesting part is that a lot of these control schemes overlap. So if you take that example from earlier, the NIST 800-53, 975 controls, roughly 600 and so actually overlap with requirements you need to do to meet GDPR. And so if you take a tool like Compliance Manager and track your commitments across those 600 controls, when new regulation comes in, say like GDPR, Compliance Manager actually helps you figure out what that delta is. So you don't start from scratch every time there's a new rule or an update to a rule. You can take the controls you've already implemented and count them towards the work or take them as credit towards the work you need to do to actually get compliant. And that's pretty important, pretty exciting, and it should save a lot of time and headache. The second place I really want to focus on is around protection and governance of data. This actually was the hardest thing for us to do once we understood the rules when it came to GDPR. It was controlling the data as we know it and as we see it. And the first piece was what I mentioned earlier, which was coming up with a common way, a common approach to do things. So when you look at the tool set that we provide through the Microsoft 365 Security and Compliance Center, we've unified that system to allow customers to discover data in their organization, come up with rules to classify it, and then once that classification is done, label the data with a set of tags that can then be used to apply policies. And those policies are bucketed in really protection of the data and then governance of the data. On the protection side, you'd think of saying, if data has been classified or identified as having these tags, they should automatically be encrypted using some technology. Data should be restricted using rights management or access controls. We also have the ability to automatically watermark or add headers or footers to documents so that it's possible to see, as a person editing the document or managing a document, that it should be controlled as customer confidential or for your eyes only type of thing. The other part, and the part that I think is going to be the biggest place where you can be a hero to your organization, is around data governance. As I mentioned, that data growing 50% a year and telemetry growing 100% a year, deciding how much of it we should really keep, that question of hygiene, is actually a problematic one. And so with the tools we've got, we allow you to flag data through sensitive types and decide at a very granular level, should I keep this data or not? Should it be deleted? How long should it be archived? Should users be allowed to change it once it's been saved into the system? Should we keep a copy of it? And so the Security and Compliance Center in Office 365 gives you all those tools and lets you apply them in an automatic way. Lastly, there's a system built in there that lets you monitor and remediate. And by remediate, you'll get alerts that tell you that something is going wrong, users are saving documents of a certain type in the wrong place. You can set up a scheme or a system or processes or even code to stop people from doing things that your organization doesn't want. This is a key part of it. The last part about unifying this whole scheme is the set of tools we built for the Security and Compliance Center apply to any place where there's Microsoft touch points across devices, looking at our applications, across our cloud services on premises. And we have the fortune of having many partners here at the Ignite Forum that are deeply integrated in the Security and Compliance Center and in Office 365 that extend our capabilities beyond the reach of Microsoft products, which is another key piece of the puzzle. Before I hand back, I did want to touch on data subject requests. I'm curious, have any of you or your organizations dealt with data subject requests before? 1, 2. So usually it's the biggest organizations who've dealt with this even before the GDPR. We had an Australian customer where we met their privacy officer who spent 20 hours a week of her time dealing with data subject requests from her folks. And that was before GDPR, and that was dealing with Australian and American and South American employees. So it wasn't even Europe. In fact, prior to the GDPR, it was possible for data subjects to go and request these things. What GDPR did is it added a bite that if you don't adhere to the rules and you don't provide the data in a structured way, well, then the European Union could fight you, the users could take you to court. And so the rules were there, just not really enforced. And so while we have the Security and Compliance Center that could already allow you to categorize, tag, search for, export, and provide data to users, we've added in the last few months a data privacy tab to the Security and Compliance Center that streamlines the process of being able to go and access or discover data. You can pivot your searches more efficiently on those supported sensitive types, and then download the results and get them to users in a more efficient way than was possible in the past. Just to close, if there's a place where you can be a superhero to your organization, it is to set up those governance programs ahead of time, because it'll allow you to do data subject requests quickly, efficiently, and scoped down to the smallest amount of data so that you're doing what your organization has as a policy, rather than rushing to answer a data subject request within 48 hours and giving users data that they may not or perhaps should not have. With that, I'll hand back to Kalinda and Matt. Thank you. Do you want the... I'll give you this.
We thought we'd move forward so you guys could see this. And these are very hard chairs to get up on when you're 4'11", so I'll just say. I did that successfully. The worst part's over.
Yeah, I didn't have a great basketball career myself. So, Kalinda, thanks for being here. First, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and about your role at LinkedIn?
Sure. So my name is Kalinda Reyna, and I head up global privacy at LinkedIn. At LinkedIn, privacy is centered in our legal department. So I am a lawyer, and my team is all lawyers. But because we are so focused on trust, similar to Microsoft, with our members and our customers, there are many parts of our organizations that deal with privacy. So you'll see pieces of it in security as well in our data analytics team as well.
Can you talk a little bit about how LinkedIn started its journey to GDPR compliance?
Yeah, well, I'll speak first about my journey started when I was at Nintendo as CPO there. It was 2012, and I got an email from our GC saying there's this new law that may come in with fines as high as 4% of global annual revenue. And I thought, oh, there's no way that will ever pass. We don't need to worry. Fast forward to 2016 at LinkedIn. We started the whole process by going first to our executives and explaining to them this new law. And one of the things that they said to us was something I've heard from Kim and Kareem, which is, well, we already have a privacy program, so this shouldn't be a problem. The only thing they were really focused on was the fines. And one of the things that we learned through the process is that a lot of what had to happen for GDPR, if you already have a program in place, is getting yourself to scale. So that was one of the big things that we had to think about from the very beginning, once we got to the execs, got the funding, and then began to cascade out.
So as you reflect back on the LinkedIn GDPR journey, what do you reflect back on as the most significant challenge that you had to contend with?
It was all very challenging because it was a 2-year process. We had 2,300 engineers at the height of it. We had a program that stretched across every division of the company, so it was quite a significant undertaking. But the 2 hardest challenges were, one, getting people in the organization to recognize that this is not just a law, check the box, that this is actually a changed way in which we're going to need to function as technology businesses and as any business that is dealing with data today. Kareem, in his presentation, went over the fact that all of us in our companies have a tremendous amount of data that we are adding on a daily basis. And that is something that is changing the ways in which we work and the ways in which we as companies handle the data that we have. So when we started the GDPR journey, the view of our executives was, well, great, we'll just keep building on the program that we have and we'll make it a little stronger. And the thing that we had to convince people of is that this is just a new way of thinking. Let's not think about this as something that legal's going to tell you what to do and all will be well in 2 years. This is about fundamentally changing the frameworks upon which a lot of the systems in our companies rely, because we are planning for a long-term future, not just GDPR, but looking around the corners of the new laws that are coming that you mentioned, as well as just the amount of data that's going to increase over time means that the scale we had to function at is much higher.
So based on your experience and the insights that you've developed, what would be the top 3 things that you would advise this audience as they start to think about their GDPR journey?
Yeah, I would say think globally. So don't just approach this as an EU GDPR issue, but look at this as an opportunity within your organization to figure out what you would need to do to comply with GDPR across the globe, not just in Europe, because we are seeing multiple countries come up with laws that are very similar to GDPR. So that's a key thing. The other thing I'd say is think like a team, and I think that's been a key takeaway of this entire discussion is GDPR is not something that one team within an organization can manage. It's not something you can do just from legal or with engineering or with your security teams or even with your product teams. It was an entire group effort to get this done. And so we had to cross several different divisions within the organization and come together as one to make that happen. The last thing I'd say is learn from each other, because one of the hardest things about GDPR, and Kim touched on this when she was talking about purchase orders, is how hard it is to interpret and understand and to know what others in the industry are doing. And I think Microsoft has been a great partner, not just to us, but to its other customers in terms of hosting a lot of events that help people talk about GDPR and the other regulations and what's coming so that we can learn from each other and prepare together. This was definitely one of those projects that it didn't help you as a company to just work on it internally. It really helped to get out and learn from other companies.
So it sounds like good coaching. Is there anything that you reflect on that you would want to do over on, that as you think about your journey, you would have wanted to have done differently, that would be useful for the audience to think about?
If you're just starting this, more funding and more staffing. You can never underestimate how much help you're going to need to get this done. And the other thing that we did that was very helpful is I set a deadline of December of 2017 and said we needed to get done by then, and clearly we weren't, which really helped to get us more staffing. So I'd say one of the hardest things in doing this is the assumption that we'll just build on what we have and we'll be able to handle that. Really, the scale of this is so much larger that you really need to think about it in a new way and get your executives to recognize how much funding you'll need to get this done.
Terrific. I wonder, Kareem or Kim, same question I would pose to you. As you reflect back on the GDPR journey, and you reflect back on your considerable experiences and the highs and the lows, as you think about do-overs, what might you have done differently? What might you be able to coach the audience on that would be useful for them to hear?
I think similar to what you were saying about resources, but I'd say if I could have a do-over, it'd be we brought in a lot of people that didn't have privacy experience. We had a lot of people who had a lot of privacy experience. So I would have done some kind of training or clarity of roles so that everybody understood what everybody else was doing, because, it was one of those things where we were like almost throwing resources at it to solve the problem. And I think if we've paused for a moment to say, hey, everybody needs to have a baseline level of understanding of privacy, how Microsoft is doing privacy, what each other's roles are, that I think that would have helped.
Yeah, all those are a good suggestion. More people figuring out what the jobs are. From my perspective, it's a bit what I mentioned before. The idea of data governance and starting that sooner than later is, I think, a critical one. You think of data as your assets. Categorizing those assets earlier, even if you don't quite have the granularity or precision, actually would have helped us get to the finish line with a lot less grief. We spent a long time waiting to start, as it were, till we figured every last detail out, rather than saying, hey, let's just go after what we know today and start doing that. And we ended up repeating multiple times anyways how we categorize data, which data we categorize, what we thought was special. And in the end, had we started sooner, it would have been a much less turbulent run up to the finish line on the project.
From the legal perspective, as I reflect back, that is precisely the perspective that I have as well. So it doesn't bear repeating, but well said, thank you. So we have 10 minutes, and we are happy to entertain any questions that you all may have. And if not, probably just have a public service announcement. The other compliance sessions at Ignite are on the board there, and I presume available, to you in your app or in your other materials. And a number of additional reference materials for you. I know that the panelists and I would be happy also to entertain any questions that you have after the session. We very much appreciate you coming by today, and best wishes in the future. Thank you.